Okay, this lesson is on how to create highlights and shadows for your objects so that they become a little bit more 3D realistic. So there's two different ways that you can achieve this, and one of them is by using shapes that have a blur effect, and that's what gives you this kind of effect, this kind of fuzzy effect that does a highlight or a shadow if you had instances of shadows here. And then on this one here, we have a gradient effect using blending modes that also apply to the objects so that it makes it also appear somewhat three-dimensional. Now these two different types, how you choose between which one you want to do is you want to look at whether you've been filling in your objects with solid color or whether you've been filling them in with gradients and making them very three-dimensional. If you have been using gradients, and this is probably your way to go. If you have not been using gradients and you're kind of doing that more solid color and want to achieve three-dimensional effect of the object, then you want to probably opt for this effect where even the shadows and highlights are more solid. Okay? Now, to achieve this, what you need is basic shapes around your object. Now, generally speaking, the shapes go with the form and the outline of the shape, and they're towards the outside of the shape. So see this one here, how it goes along here, and then it kind of curves back around. Similarly here, it curves and it goes back around to the bottom. And usually the shadows are on one side and the highlights are on the other. It just really depends on the light source. If the light source is from the top and kind of in front of the viewer, like over here looking at the 8 ball, from the front, then you would get highlights like this where you have some highlights here towards the top and in the frontal view. Okay, so and in this one it kind of has the light shadow coming in from the right hand side towards the top and the bottom here. Okay, so with these ones, with these shapes, I've just arranged them similar to what they are right here. Okay, and to create these shapes, you can either draw them like this one's just an oval using your shape tool, and then these here you can either do them with your pen tool or you can even use your pathfinder. I'm going to show you really quick how you could use your pathfinder to create these shapes. I'm just going to grab this circle. I'm going to copy it. I'm holding down Alt to make a copy, and I'm just going to overlay them here. And what I'm doing is I'm selecting these two shapes. And remember, we have that Pathfinder tool. I can go into the Pathfinder, and this one here will break it all apart. It'll divide it. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And then I'm going to, by default, if I click off of it, it groups them, so it selects everything. What I want to do is I want to right-click or control-click on a Mac, and you want to ungroup it. And when you ungroup it and you click off of it, and you click back on it again, you're left with all the extra little pieces. And again, this is in your Pathfinder tutorial. There's a handout right underneath the video that has the lecture on Pathfinder. So you can take a look at the instructions on how you would do this if you need it to go a little bit more slower. But anyways, I'm going to get rid of that one. I could just keep this one, and basically these are the ones that you could use inside here. Now I just did it really quick, so it's not the exact size, but you can kind of shrink them and adjust them. Okay, as you need them, and then you'd end up with, I'm just going to go ahead and change the outline so you can kind of see it a little bit better. Alright, so you end up with those shapes, okay? I'm going to undo all of this just to get it out of the way. I just wanted to show you how you could do some of these shapes more easily with your Pathfinder tool. I'm going to delete those. All right, so that's how I kind of came up with these shapes. Okay, so you can use the Pathfinder tool for that, or some of these you can hand draw. It's really up to you which way you want to work. All right, so now we have these shapes, and what you want to do is you want to select your shapes. I like to, when I know that I'm going to use similar shades and shadows, I just like to say that these are all highlights and I'm using all white on them. I'm going to go ahead and select them, and then I'm going to assign a color to the inside, and I'm just going to go ahead and work with white right now. If it doesn't quite give me what I want, I can always change the color afterwards. And I'm going to go ahead and remove that, okay? And I end up with these solid shapes, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the opacity on them. And this is kind of going to achieve the effect that I'm going for. But you'll notice that they're still very solid, more like these ones here. And this could actually work depending on what you're doing. But if you want to take it one step further and make them more realistic, I'm going to go ahead and actually I'm going to leave that one because that one I don't want to apply the same effect. These ones I want pretty blurry, and this one that's a little smaller I don't want as blurry. So I'm just selecting those two, and I'm going to go to Effect, and I'm going to select Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'll go ahead and just leave it at 60 here. And I'm going to preview it. And I notice I get this. Now I like the blur. I don't like how dark it is, but I can affect that later. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I can come in here, and if I click off of it and I said, oh, that's a little too dramatic, or maybe I like that, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and select these. And in your appearance box, if this window is not open, you want to go to Window, Appearance, and then you come here to the appearance, and what you'll notice is it'll tell you that there's a Gaussian blur on this. What's important is that if I don't like the effect that I have, that I don't go back into window and reapply a blur. What I want to do is edit the blur, and I do that in this appearance window. So I'm going to go ahead and click it, and I can go ahead and either reduce it if I wanted that. Maybe I don't like that. I'm going to undo it. I'm going to put it back. Okay. And then I can also change the opacity here, or I can go ahead and change the opacity here. I'm going to go ahead and bring it down to 30 and then see if I like that better. And I kind of like that. This is a little less, but this is good. So we can kind of see it a little bit better. Now this one doesn't have anything, and you notice that it looks a little odd. So I can go ahead and select that one, and then I can go into Effect, and I can go into Blur, and I can do a Gaussian blur. And I can select the amount. Now this one I'm going to turn on the preview. This one I don't want to be as intense, because otherwise if I do it too much then it virtually disappears here. So I want to go and reduce the amount here. I'll go ahead. I can always add more if I want more. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to click off of it, and then there we have it. I could always lighten it. I can lower the opacity on this as well. So that's how we achieve this effect. It's basically you create shapes, you lower the opacity, and then you add a blur to it. Okay. Now on this one here, we go ahead and we select these, and these ones actually have gradient applied to them. So if we look at this here, this actually has a gradient. If we look at the example here, or if we click on the gradient tool and we go over here, I got to make sure that I'm on the fill here. There we go. And now I can see that it's a black gradient to a white gradient at the top. So it's similar to what we had here, except for this is all white. This one recedes into black, and that's why it kind of disappears here at the end, and we don't see that edge. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do that for these ones. I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'm going to go in the fill color here. I'm going to go and add a gradient fill. So I'm going to grab the gradient tool, and I'm going to go to my gradient. I'm going to add a linear gradient. Okay. And now I'm going to grab that, the gradient tool is already selected. I'm going to grab that, and I'm actually going to turn it so that I'm dragging vertical like this, okay? Now you'll notice that this is really severe. It goes from white to black, but it goes very black all of a sudden. I can adjust these if I don't like that. I can always tweak this so it's a little bit more gradating, less severe, less intense, that it doesn't change from black to white all of a sudden, okay? And now I can remove the outline. Okay. And now it's fine if it looks like that. I'm going to go ahead and select this one, and I'm going to use my eyedropper so that it copies this so I don't have to redo it all over again. And I'm going to go ahead and try that for this one here, and I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now what you'll notice is that this one's gradiating sideways, and I actually want it to go from dark to light this way, so I have to change the direction of my gradient. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that by... let's go here. Oh, it won't let me grab it again. Make sure that you're not on your stroke, that you're on your fill here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. I'm going to turn it. All right, there we go. I'm going to move it down here, and I'm just going to adjust this. Okay, I'm just holding down and dragging in. To get this, you have to kind of click in the right spot to get that little turning circle. And I could just redraw one from scratch if I wanted to. Okay, now I notice that there's not enough black here, so I'm not getting that gradation that I want. So I'm going to move it up so that there's more of a gradation here. And now I'm going to go down here, and I'm just going to fill this one. This one I could probably, if I put a gradient in there, I'm not really going to be able to see it. So I'm just going to fill it in with white, and I'm going to remove my outline. Okay, so now you'll notice this is a little severe. A little intense here, so I'm going to go to the layer modes to see what I can apply to make it look more like this here. So if I go into the transparency palette, and that's under Window, Transparency, I can go in here and I can apply different layer modes. Okay, that one totally disappeared on me. Multiply totally disappeared on me as well. I'm going to try Overlay. Okay, Overlay tends to work. Okay, so there's Overlay. Notice the gradation isn't as intense as, isn't as noticeable as here. I'm going to go ahead and apply the overlay on this one as well. Okay, And if I want to adjust it, like if I want it to look more like that, I just have to select it. I can go into my gradient tool, make sure that I'm on my fill gradient here so I can adjust it. And this one, for some reason, it applied it sideways, and that's probably why it wasn't doing what we wanted it to do. And I'm going to rotate this up, and I'm going to bring this down here. Okay. So when you think you got it how you want it, you can do that. Okay, and I'm going to do this one as well. Overlay. Okay, and that's kind of how you achieve this effect here. This one is just I'm just going to do an overlay as well. It's just a solid shape with an overlay on top of it, and you can do that. Okay, now you could also add effects to this one to make them blurry, but usually the effect that you're going for is either something like this or something like this, and for this one you just need solid masses of color. Okay. Now, in terms of whether your objects are black or white or not black or white, you can also do this with gradient. Instead of using black and white, I'm going to show you this example here. If we take a look at her hair, this gradient here is from a lighter orange to a darker reddish orange, and they also have a layer mode of multiply attached, and the multiply makes it darker. And then here you have some other ones with just color, but with a gradient on top of them and no actual layer mode. So you can use gradients in this way too to make shadows and highlights, and they're just in color. Okay, when you're working with highlights and shadows in here, if you were to go and change this, say, to a red color, I'm going to choose a medium-sized red color. You'll notice that because it's a white color that you're using, it pretty much looks the way it should, but you could also add shadows to it. And in that case, what you might want to do is grab, say, a shape like this one. I'm just going to borrow this shape here. And if you want to add, I don't want to add that highlight there, although see, you can use some of these gradients over here. I want that blurry effect, so I'm going to add a blur, but I'm also going to check first before I add any kind of blur whether just a darker color works. So instead of using black and white, I'm going to go ahead and use like a darker red, a deeper red. Okay, and because it has a layer mode, it kind of does this brighter effect. I'm going to go ahead and select it here. And I'm going to change this overlay here. I'm going to go to normal. And what I'm going to try first is I'm going to try to first lower the opacity. And now you notice I have a dark shadow. I'm going to move it off a little to the edge. I'm going to go ahead and effect, and I'm going to go ahead and blur it, and I'm going to go do a Gaussian blur. And now I'm going to preview, and I'm going to up it to see how much I can do here. Hit OK. And now you'll notice that I have a little bit of a darker shadow. I'm going to go ahead and zoom into it. So you have some shapes that are adding a shadow. I'm going to up the opacity so you can see it further. All right, that are adding a shadow here, and you might want to move them closer to the edge. It's up to you. You might even want to make them thicker and fatter. And then you have this lighter one here. So like this one, say that it's not fat enough, you can go ahead and grab this so that you can really see it. I got to click on that point. I grab my direct select tool. There we go. You can do it like that so you can see it and that it's more apparent. Okay, so that's a shadow here, and these are highlights, and these are all using the effects of blur. Okay, and this is the solid, more mass effect using layer modes and gradients. Okay, this concludes your lesson on doing highlights and shadows on objects to make them look more three-dimensional and add form. If you have any questions, I led at hawaii.edu or 808-343-9565.